Hello and welcome, crack souls of the internet, to Real Reddit Horror, the series where I read horror stories from Redditors that they swear are true. In this episode, I have 4 very chilling stories, so let's dive right into the realm of horror. Something in the dark growled my name, from Dry Marionberry 5283. When I was around 12 years old, I lived in a cabin with my family on about 5 acres of land. There was lots of fixing up we had to do on it before living in it, because squatters had taken over the abandoned property. But it was really fun working on it together as a family. When we first moved in, I loved the house. There were plenty of places to explore outside, and the most I had to worry about were the spiders, snakes, and mice that would find their way in our home sometimes. That was until I started to see things. It started as just an occasional glimpse of something dark, thin, and tall running down the hallway out of the corner of my eye while I was on the couch. Then it got more and more prevalent. I would see the dark being standing there or just peeking at me from behind things from out of my peripheral vision. Every time I turned to look at it, it would be gone in an instant. It would do this over and over, almost taunting me. I began to get intense feelings of dread, like something was watching me, waiting for its moment to strike. I especially remember the night when it was the worst, the night that I fell asleep on the couch, which is what prompted me to tell you all this story. After a long night of having fun and playing Minecraft, staying up way too late with my online friends, I decided I would pop a movie on and just sleep on the sofa. After falling asleep, I woke up at a random time in the middle of the night. I instantly felt cold, afraid, and like something was seriously wrong. I lied there in the dark, and it didn't take long for me to realize that I could hear my parents in the room next to me having freaking sex, which luckily for me only lasted a few short minutes. I couldn't shake the horrible feeling that I woke up with, and I also felt grossed out by what I had just heard. So I kind of stayed frozen on the couch in fear, hoping that I could fall back asleep soon. Every ounce of my being was telling me not to move, that something wasn't right. That's when I heard it from the kitchen. Something decided to make itself known that night, and it growled my name, almost in a "I'm gonna getcha" kind of way. I remember feeling my blood run cold. My body felt tingly like static, and I felt like all of my breath had just been taken out of my body. I will never forget its voice. Raspy, deep, and croaky is the best way I can describe it. I shut my eyes tight while shaking and praying that I could just go back to sleep and forget everything. I honestly think the amount of fear I was feeling helped me fall back asleep very quickly as a sort of coping mechanism. I was genuinely convinced that I was going to die that night. The next day, when I told my parents what I heard, we tried to bless the home and cast out whatever was in there. We anointed every door in the home with oils, saged every room, and told whatever was there that it did not belong. It genuinely seemed to work. A few years later, I found out that in that very house, my father was doing some real fucked up shit. He isn't in my life anymore, and I'm not going to get into the nasty details, but I believe that he was attracting evil beings into the home with the kind of stuff he was into. He was doing evil things, and that brought evil into our home. So a few people, myself included, were curious about what exactly Dry's father did. She told this Redditor that they really don't want to know. I said that I'm 100% confident that I could handle whatever it is that Dry's father did do, and that if it's alright with her, she could DM it to me. She didn't respond, and because I am someone who wants to respect boundaries, I'm not going to push any further. Breathing, from Tiny_cartographer 824. When I was in high school, I moved to a major city suburb. While the majority of this area was suburban in appearance, there were still some rural features. One thing I hated about this area was that it didn't have the best lighting. Streetlights in my area were scarce, so it was always extremely dark at night. My house was situated at the corner of a street and in an avenue. My house faced the main street, which was a few miles long and led to many neighborhoods in the area. The avenue that my house was on ran perpendicular to the main street. It was about a quarter of a mile long and made up of about 6 houses. The avenue was almost entirely gravel. At the end of the avenue, the gravel ended and dense vegetation began. This dense vegetation eventually led to a state forest. At the time, I had been dating a girl that lived in the area. In order to walk to and from her house, I traveled the main street previously mentioned and walked it all the way to the end of the street. The end of the street led to a small field. Walking through the field led to a wooden fence. The wooden fence separated the backyards of multiple houses, including her house, from the field. After leaving her house one night, I realized that it was a lot later than I thought. It was after midnight and we had school the next day, so I wanted to get home and get to sleep. After she locked her fence door and went inside her house, I turned around and made my way through the field. As mentioned previously, this area had virtually no lighting at night. For this reason, I opted not to use the sidewalk and walked in the middle of the main street. I did this mainly to monitor my surroundings. Walking in the middle of the street meant I could use the moonlight and could avoid walking extremely close to trees. At this point, I was nearing my house and was approaching the area that I called the Black Hole. I called this area, remaining half of a mile to my house, the Black Hole because it was the darkest stretch of my journey home. There were no streetlights and mostly trees on both sides. After entering the Black Hole, I began to hear a weird sound. It was too far to make out clearly, and I thought that it may just be an animal, so I didn't think too much about it and continued walking. I could hear a car approaching in the distance, so I momentarily made my way to the sidewalk and waited for the car to pass, and made my way back into the middle of the street. After maybe a minute of walking the main street, I heard the sound again. At this point, I realized the sound was getting louder, so I decided to increase my pace. As I was nearing my house, I continued listening for the sound in hopes that I could determine its origin. The longer I listened, the louder it got. Eventually, the sound was so loud that I could clearly make out a forceful inhale and exhale. I was terrified. I knew that whatever was making the sound was extremely close to me now, but I decided that I would not look back until I got close enough to my house. This way I could utilize the light from the only streetlight in the area, at the corner of my house. I could hear the inhales and exhales getting louder and louder and louder until I finally neared the streetlight. I eventually worked up the courage to turn around and was shocked by what I saw. When I turned around, there was a man right behind me. Not on the sidewalk or on one side of the road. He was so close to my back that if he tripped, he would have knocked me over. I looked into his eyes and he looked into mine. He then abruptly moved around me and then ran down the avenue that I lived on and into the darkness. If you made it this far, thanks for reading. I have a few more creepy stories that I don't mind writing about if anyone is interested in reading about them. Man, I don't know what the hell that guy was doing. The average person in my neighborhood would have punched him right in the face for being that close behind them. He's honestly lucky that Tiny didn't react physically. Also, if you are watching this, Tiny, I am interested in your other creepy stories. After all, I'm someone who's always looking for a good read due to this series. Never Going Back to Connecticut, from Waziat. I've been reading a lot of stories on here lately, and it made me start thinking about some of my own paranormal experiences. This story is 100% true. There's not a whole lot to it, but it is one of the most viscerally horrifying things that has ever happened to me. Back in 2016, I was in a long-term relationship with this girl whose family lived in a small town in Connecticut. We'd been dating for a little over a year, and I'd met her parents a few times, but this was our first time actually driving down and staying at her childhood home. I was already a little nervous about crashing with her parents and making a good impression, but she assured me everything would be fine. The whole drive down was incredibly scenic, and the town itself had all the usual trappings of a cute colonial town. We pulled up to the place, and it's this beautiful 3-story old house, half sitting on a hill overlooking a big green yard. Her parents greeted us and were super welcoming, leading us into an open foyer with a dark wooden staircase. The house was clearly very old, but in a nice, cozy sort of way. It's clearly been remodeled from those old-school New England homes with some slight modern touches. My ex said we'd be sleeping in a guest room upstairs because her childhood bedroom only had a skinny single bed. She made sure to mention, though, that her house is sort of haunted, and that the guest room is where most of the ghost activity had centered around. I asked her to explain what exactly that meant, and she said her brother had slept in the room a couple times and weird stuff had happened while he was in there. She didn't really elaborate any further, and in a way I could tell she was trying to downplay it or not freak me out. She did say, though, that pretty much everyone in her family had one strange experience or another while living in the house. When her dad was remodeling the kitchen, he was home alone working and sat down to take a break. While he was sitting in silence drinking some water, he suddenly felt a strong grip on his right shoulder from behind. He jumped out of his chair and looked around, but no one was there. He's a completely normal, non-superstitious guy, and when I asked him about it, he said he thought a spirit was trying to warn him not to make changes to the house. Another time, my ex was home alone with her dog watching TV downstairs, and all of a sudden she had heard loud banging footsteps walking down the hall upstairs. As the footsteps continued down the hall, she could swear she heard someone banging on the walls, slowly approaching the top of the staircase. Her dog ran to the bottom of the stairs and started barking like crazy. She grabbed her phone, grabbed the dog, seeing nothing at the top of the stairs, and then ran outside. She called her parents and called the police while watching the house from the sidewalk a little ways away. From where she was situated, she could see both entrances to the house, and the way the windows are set up, you couldn't jump out a second-story window without breaking your legs. The police searched the place and found no one, and her family chalked it up to it being a ghost. There has also been some smaller spooky stuff that has happened, like their attic door closing on its own. Even if they put a chair in front of the door, when they go up to get something, they'll come back down the stairs to find the door closed. For some reason, that irked me the most, and I refused to go up there. Anyway, the actual experience I had was my first night staying there. We were settling down to bed in the guest room, and I remembered being slightly bothered by the lighting in the room. It just felt off, or slightly uncanny. It was both very bright and dim at the same time. I figured I was just tired, and we climbed into bed and slowly nodded off to sleep. Now, I don't know if I was dreaming before this happened, but in the middle of me being asleep, a woman appeared in my dreams. She was violently angry and started addressing me directly. She showed me the people in my life that I loved, my ex, family, and friends, and she started putting broken glass into their gums, scraping against their teeth. I was just frozen in the dream. I couldn't even react. She told me that she was going to torture and kill everyone I cared about. She promised me that everything she was saying was very real. I tried to wake up and was mentally struggling against whatever grip she had on me, and for a second I did wake up. I was in bed sitting in the darkness, and then somehow the woman transmitted from the previous dream to this new one and screamed, "You will never escape!" I woke up, for real this time, bolting upright, screaming and violently shaking. This woke up my girlfriend, and she immediately tried to calm me down, asking what was wrong. I started crying and trying to recount to her what had just happened, and how viscerally real and fucked up it was. She reassured me that it was just a dream, and I slowly started to calm down a little. I was genuinely afraid to go back to sleep, but we ended up somehow being able to nod back off, and I made it to morning without any other incident. We stayed at the house in that room a couple more times over the years after that, and I never had a dream like that again. You could probably chalk it up to the power of suggestion. Being in a new place, being told that the guest room had ghost activity, but that is the only time before or since that I've ever experienced a true night terror or woke up screaming. I have never had a dream that even approaches the level of insanity as that one. I honestly don't know what to make of it. It's probably just my brain freaking out, but as a first-timer in that house, it felt like a warning. Here are some of the comments from Waziat's post. As someone who grew up in Connecticut and recently moved back here, there's a lot of activity around here, particularly in the smaller towns like the ones you're talking about. We live in a similar old house in what sounds to be a similar old town, and yep, can confirm. Glad nothing worse happened. Glad you're okay. Sounds terrifying. Thank you. With a dream, you're truly just left like, well, I guess this is my fault, but it was unlike anything I've ever experienced. If you don't trust your gut, trust your dog. From Turpy. I, a 25-year-old female, had an experience about 4 days ago that I haven't been able to shake. I was dog and house sitting for my boyfriend, a 26-year-old, while he was away on a backpacking trip. My boyfriend's home is in a semi-remote area at the bottom of a hill at the back of a few acres of property. He's right next to the highway, which has, opposite to us, a small rural neighborhood. It's both very sketchy and very safe, meaning that the community is close, but people frequently keep to themselves, and there are lots of abandoned and dilapidated homes right next to very well-kept homes. A pretty typical countryside neighborhood. So I really didn't feel unsafe to agree to watch my boyfriend's property and his dog Hennessy. Hennessy is a 115-pound jet black American Bulldog English Labrador mix. He's basically all muscle, and ever since my boyfriend and I began dating, he's become very protective of me and my own dog Lottie. Lottie is a 57-pound poodle mix. I'm a dog groomer, so she's usually done up in pretty silly haircuts with bows and everything. All of this is to say that one of my dogs is very intimidating and the other is not. Because of his strength, however, I cannot walk Hennessy and Lottie at the same time on my own. So I usually walk Lottie alone, then go back and get Hennessy to walk him alone. We do about 30 minutes of walking each, and I like to take Hennessy after Lottie at night because I feel safer with him as it gets later. This is important because this was the case about 4 nights ago. I was 3/4 of the way through my walk with Lottie when I got this really weird feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I looked around to see that about 30 feet or so back, there was a tall man in a hoodie standing next to an older, run-down home. I instantly thought that the hoodie was weird. I live in Northern California, and it's early August. It doesn't get colder than 87 degrees in the evening, especially when the sun was still setting like it was at the time. I forced myself to brush it off, as I tend to be fairly paranoid due to my years of reading Let's Not Meet stories. As I kept walking, the sun kept setting, and the streets began to slowly get darker. I would glance back from time to time and notice that the man was keeping pace with me, not breaking that 30-odd foot distance. If I turned a corner, so did he. If I sped up, so did he. Finally, we reached the highway, and I crossed right before a car came speeding past, hoping that if the guy was following me, this would put some distance between him and myself, which it did, but that didn't stop him from continuing to follow me. I walked as fast as I could to the house, not wanting to turn around, but now being able to hear his footsteps on the gravel. At this point, Lottie had noticed him too, and started to bark and growl. I forced her to keep moving, and thankfully I made it back inside the house, slamming and locking the door, hoping that was the end of it. It was not. Moments after I shut and locked the door, I felt someone trying to open it. The dogs heard this too, and started barking because they always do when someone is at the door. There's no peephole on my door, but I can talk to whoever is on the other side. It's a pretty thin door. So I yelled out and asked who was there. Through the barking, I could hear a man's voice. "I love your dog. Can I meet her?" For some reason, the way he said it was so creepy. It was like there was nothing behind it. It was kind of like he had rehearsed that line or decided to say it beforehand. I yelled back, "No," and asked him to please go away. He paused for another second and then again said, "I love your dog. Can I meet her?" He starts trying the door again, this time pushing up against the door. By this point, Hennessy can tell something is wrong, and so can Lottie. The hair on the back of Hennessy's neck is standing up, and he's mashing his teeth together while growling. At that moment, I don't know what possessed me, but I threw Lottie into the bathroom behind me and grabbed Hennessy by the collar, keeping him close to the door with me. He's still barking and going crazy. I hear the man repeat that he wants to meet my dog, and I yelled out, "Leave!" He paused and then slammed into my door. I see the door move, and at that moment, I unlocked it and opened it just wide enough that Hennessy could get about halfway out. He's going bonkers at this point. My hand is starting to hurt from holding him back. I can hear his teeth clacking as he's ferociously chomping towards the man. Well, this dude was not expecting Hennessy at all. He stumbled back, almost falling over, and cursed as he scrambled to stay off the ground. He didn't even look at me, and instead booked it up the hill as fast as he could, out of sight. I managed to pull Hennessy back in and called the cops to tell them what had happened. I never got a good look at the guy, and they basically told me there wasn't anything I could really do. But they did take my statement and told me they'd contact me if anything ever came up of it. I am so thankful for Hennessy. After all of that, I snuggled up with him and Lottie that night and cried because it had all hit me how terrifying that was. I literally went out the next day and brought him the biggest bone I could find from a pet store, nearly an hour away, because he had really earned it. I also got Lottie something too. I don't know why this creep didn't get the hint when I had 2 dogs barking inside, but my assumption is that he didn't really realize he was hearing 2 barks, or assumed that if I had 2 dogs, they were both like my puffy poodle. That is to say, he wasn't afraid. I'm so thankful the guy didn't have a firearm, and looking back now, I probably should have just called the cops and kept my door closed. But I hope that maybe because he saw Hennessy, he'll know not to come back and mess with us again, because if he does, I'll let my big sweet boy rip his arm off. Here are some of the comments from Turpy's post. That's horrifying. You're right about the potential of him being armed, but I think you handled it well enough in the moment. Thank you so much. That was my biggest worry in hindsight. When he hit the door, he almost broke it down. It's a cheap door, and I think my fear of him getting inside is what made me decide in the moment that letting Hennessy scare the guy off was a good idea. Oh my God, that is terrifying. So glad you are okay. Good boy Hennessy. Did you tell your boyfriend? Oh yes. He's going out and getting me pepper spray this week. He's honestly pretty upset about what happened, but he's really proud of his dog, and he's thankful that Hennessy was willing to protect me. If you're looking for a community to talk about horror-related topics, you should definitely join my Discord server. It is still very new and very small, but I hope to see it grow to be something really special. Thank you very much for watching this video. I've been Craxo Spinner, and until the next story, I'm just in my room.